Patty, how you doing? I hope you're well. All right, education. How do we improve it? Another thing to do. There's a lot involved. Education's complex and complicated. It's multifactorial. So of course, there's many factors to look at that can be to improve it. One of them, of course, is administration. Needs to be more focus on that. Sometimes there's too much focus on some teachers, teacher this, teacher that, while administrators get away kind of scot-free. But principals, superintendents, administrators are the ones who are supposed to set the standard and direct the culture, not an individual teacher. It's not the teacher's responsibility. We know how people work, and some teachers can do that, but the person in charge in the organization, in that small social context, an organization is part of human society, which is part of the broader world reality. So in a school, it's this teeny tiny little nothing of significance compared to society and all that. That's one thing I think some administrators need to grasp. They have only a social position, hierarchy, authority in that organization. They are, that does not make them at all better than or superior to someone outside of that context. And this comes, of course, from what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, from decades of teaching, talking to people, seeing what's out there, seeing what people have to say. I'll put some videos up too. And we know about bad bosses in other areas. It's not just in school, of course, or administrators. It's well known that there are bad bosses. It happens to be the same in education, of course, also. There's things out there you can read, like in a legitimate forum, not just on some little make-believe blog or something. Sometimes there's people who don't get a lot of readership, but they got a hell ton of knowledge and wisdom, and they're right on. But and sometimes a big news organization gets things horribly, miserably, unethically wrong. It matters on the thinking process and so on. But I think it was unfortunate, maybe. And, there's other research, like I think maybe psychopaths are 12 times more likely to be managers and stuff like that. Maybe no surprise because they want control. Probably similar with being politicians or being in Washington. They draw a psychopath more for the control, the power, and stuff like that, rather than to actually do something good, be a good human, follow ethics, follow good politics, and stuff like that. But as I say, I've talked to a lot of people, talked to a lot of teachers, seen a lot of things, read a lot. So that's a lot of the context that comes into play here. I have a degree in philosophy, I've studied philosophy. I've learned to recognize some and classify some people based on their philosophical premises and so on. Could be better at all those things, but better now than I used to be. So that's some background to this. It's not like, oh, this is personal. It's a broader context. A lot of stuff out there, as we all know. But administration is important to get under control to help things. Part of this context here is what Jacko says with extreme ownership. That should be instituted in schools. Too bad that isn't done by the education board thingy, Department of Education. That should be something that is instituted there. But of course, some of them might not want to. But it should be done anyway by choice, individual choice of people at different schools, public schools, private schools, districts. They should choose to institute some extreme ownership, some discipline. Principals should be responsible for stuff and not pass the buck and point fingers at teachers, as you hear in a lot of stories. teachers quitting resigning because of irrational nonsense, abuse of authority, abuse of position, abuse of ethics on the part of some administrators. I'll put some stuff up there as you can see. You can gather more information, evidence than you already have. But stuff about bad managers too. You can see what some people do out there, hear about, and sometimes, it happens. Sometimes they're caught. Superintendents being fired, principals being fired. Sometimes they're caught, just like in the business world, but sometimes they're, too often, they kind of get away with it. It needs to be controlled in the business world too, culture in general, for the good of people, being better people. Oh, and thanks to the good people out there, of course, there's good managers, good administrators. We should thank them for the good work they do, for how those actually help you grow in your career, professionally, as a person. They challenge you in a good, honest, real way, not by, they don't challenge you by helping you deal with a-holes and helping you get composure and look at someone in the face who's lying to you and talking nonsense about you and sitting there calmly, not saying anything because you've learned that they're not worth talking to. I guess that's a value that some of these people have. But, we could get training in that in other ways. That shouldn't happen on the job. It affects people's career. It affects the job they do. It affects the people the company deals with. And in education, that affects the students, the quality of education they're getting, the culture that's provided, and so on. So we've got to think about what we can do then, besides some extreme ownership stuff. Because you got discipline, but that can only go so far. You got to be philosophical. Why do you want discipline? Why do you want extreme ownership? How do you really practice it? What's the nature of the world? How does it fit into everything else we know? How do we see if it's right or it's wrong, or how to apply it? How do we know what education is? How do we develop the ideas and form abstractions and see if they're right and put them into play and use wisdom to see to what degree an idea applies or not, to what degree a principle applies or not, what are the principles, how do we know, and so on and so forth. Are they rooted in human nature? How do they fit? There's something else going on that we need there. And here's some examples I've heard that are interesting. Some little examples that are a lot more rich in information than might seem on first sight. But here's one, like I say, years and decades of experience talking to people, teaching myself and talking to other teachers and reading about this and that. Like there's the work of John Gatto also. What was he, a New York State Teacher of the Year sometime, and then wrote some books about what goes on in education. But what are some things we can do to improve education and improve administration besides applying like extreme ownership and that kind of discipline? Making administrators take responsibility. So here's some things that are interesting, as I say. All right, so a teacher was up at the whiteboard teaching a class, and an administrator comes in, and the teacher's doing sciences and using a black marker. And this administrator jumps up, steps up, and speaks out in the class in front of the students. Why are you using the black marker? You should use different colors, as if they didn't know. And they're being like corrected in front of the class and treated as if they don't know to use colored markers and so on. Okay, so it's a little bit of it. So what's going on there? Of course, you don't know more of the context, who the people actually were. You don't know the whole experiential context you need to really make a good decision. Who, what, why, how. How were things being done? What's the personality and character and nature of the people involved? What's their cognitive MO? Their cognitive modus operandi? Method of operating, how do they work? And then, I guess for the other one. So in this one, it's interesting if you analyze it. Turns out that, that wouldn't, you could think, oh, that was just a mistake. The administrator just made a mistake and they can apologize, and some people might think that, but you need to think about how people operate. What are their philosophical premises? What do they tend to do? Not everything is just a mistake. Everyone, like, as we're human, we make mistakes. We don't know everything. Yeah, but you got to look at what some people, how they tend to think and judge. And that's what was going on here. This administrator was a very poor thinker. And that kind of thing was typical for them, to jump to conclusions without knowing what's going on, thinking that an idea that popped into their head was true. So, of course, here you got, okay, there's some science person using black markers. So maybe it was that the administrator thought, yeah, you're a science person. You don't know anything about aesthetics or presentation. And here, me, administrator, knows everything. And I can help you out and correct you. But it was just wrong. So, the person told me that they didn't say much to the administrator because, as I say, the administrator wasn't worth talking to. That's their kind of modus operandi. The person already knew that. They just ignored him. Wouldn't necessarily be understood or agreed upon. Sometimes there's not much point in talking to someone. You talk to other people. Like someone's accusing you of something, they're being irrational. You can't just talk to them. They're being irrational. The point is to talk to other people who are reasonable and let them see what's going on. And do only so much that you can, whatever you can, to that one person who's the irrational one. But turned out that, you got to look at, the administrator needs to learn to do root cause analysis, look at cause and effect, look at the nature of things, pause, ask the teacher what's going on before you jump to conclusions. The administrator should have thought, oh, look, they're using black markers instead of these others. I wonder why. I'll talk about this later in private. That would have been something intelligent and proper for an authority. That would have shown discipline of tongue, discipline of thought, care for another. It would have shown awareness that the other person has their own thoughts and they could be doing something you're totally unaware of, which was the case here. Because, as it turns out, the whiteboard had not been used much and stuff had been left on it over the summer. And so it was hard to get some of the stuff off since it had been there a long time, the markers that were left. And the board needed to be maybe conditioned again or something. And there were some markers there. It's only the colored ones didn't work very well on it. The person said the black marker did. And so the person was using the black just because they didn't want to throw the markers away. They wanted to use these before they got a different brand that was better to be economical. Use this black. Okay, big deal. Use black. Let this get used up. Then you can throw it away. So there's that, to be economical. And the fact that the other markers didn't work very well on the board. They kind of smeared or something, and the black marker looked nice and clean and sharp. It was the only one that did. But eventually, with more use, the board got conditioned, and the person got their own markers. Teachers, they buy stuff on their own, a different brand that the school had, and use those. It was fine. And they had been, if the administrator had any sense, they would ask, and they would learn that the teacher had been using different colors for years and years and years. It was documented here and there in different teaching they've done. So, it's just silly. The low quality thinking in an administrator of a school where that should not happen. Schools are about education. Education is about training young minds to think well. And that kind of a person is not doing that. That shows they're not capable. They don't have a good modus operandi. They should be training students to engage in root cause analysis and think about things. Maybe say that. It's like maybe the administrator could say, "Oh, I see you're using black," to the students. "I know it seems strange to me, but there must be a good reason you're doing that. Let's talk about it later." That would set a whole different tone and be a way different teaching moment for the students. Then they could learn, oh, we don't just jump to conclusions about someone. We think about them, and we see there could be something going on that they don't know. There's this great opportunity blown because the administrator doesn't know how to do that. It's just a shame. Then they're showing they don't have good control of authority or their tongue or something like that. Or they could wait and come back the next day and say, "Oh, okay, students, your teacher was using black the other day." Maybe not say anything that day. Then come back later, "Your teacher was using this black marker the other day, and I thought that they just didn't know to use others because they were a science teacher, and I was applying a prejudice that science teachers, math teachers don't know aesthetics and don't think of using color like that. And I was wrong, and I learned." And that's what we need to do, students. Get to the root cause. See what's going on. Ask someone why. Don't just jump to conclusions like some form of the Salem witch trial. It doesn't have to be that kind of thing and that degree of punishment or consequence, but there are little Salem witch trials that happen all over the country, all over the world, all through history on a daily basis. Those things we need to stamp out. We should. They have different consequences, there are different degrees, but I like to think of them as little Salem witch trials. Someone being presented as something that they're not. That's the principle I see. And then kind of punished for being what they aren't not. That's like some of the principles I draw out of it. Whether, like I say, it's that irrational or not, that's still the thing that's kind of going on. So there, I think we see one thing that will help. Root cause analysis. Logic, critical thinking. And how should we say, bringing that into play in how one is discussing things in front of students or with them. Another person had something that was interesting, and they met with a administrator, and you're supposed to ask someone. Sometimes, you learn to ask what someone thinks. Okay, what do you think about this? What should we do? Okay. And so this administrator did that to the teacher. What do you think? And then after the teacher responded, the administrator says, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. In other words, you got to see how they're acting, who was like what, know the personalities and characters and histories of the people involved. You know, when I say it, you can think maybe a different interpretation because you don't know much detail, and you could add detail and see things in a different way. But when you got all the detail and information, then, you know, there's not different interpretations that we could have. In this context, you know, we can look at some things with different perspectives and see some different lessons we can get from one thing. From any given situation, we can learn lots of lessons, but the nature of the things involved is what it is. The causality involved is what it is. That is not open to interpretation. Reality is reality. But again, this is an interesting case where that's kind of how the administrator was. It's not some accident. They were tired. They did this. Oh, it was just a mistake. Where you could actually talk to the administrator and they'd learn. This was, again, like one of them bad bosses things. Like some of the stuff you hear out there. This was like some psychopath. You know, I've talked to the person and I know a lot about what happened in different situations and through the months. So, you know, of course, I got information, not all of which I'm going to share, that you don't for these people in this situation, but, you know, we can learn that to put things in context on our own. An administrator being dismissive, we shouldn't think that, oh, that hurts my feelings. Think about the fact that that person is a psychopath. They're being dishonest. They are not as good as you in that respect. A dishonest person, well, look at it this way. We should get more angry and upset from people we care about and try to be calmer and more controlled in regard to evil people not worth our moral consideration. They shouldn't get us all riled up. In some context. Of course, you know, there's some things where we need to get riled up and get angry and do stuff and whatever. But sometimes some people are not worth getting riled up about. It's not going to help. Just like Salem witch trial. If someone's calling you a witch, it doesn't make much sense to get angry and try to dismiss them, just convince them otherwise because they're irrational. They don't care. You try to convince other people who are rational and reasonable. You don't try to convince your accusers. It doesn't help. There's no point. And then if you get angry, they're just going to try to use that against you. Look, the person's getting angry. They're a witch. You know? So, not worth much time. But, again, that's a methodological error to learn. Something like that will happen over and over again. If someone is that dismissive, then the administrator didn't get the teacher, didn't know who they were, and didn't care about their opinion, and didn't grasp that, oh, this person has been around teaching longer than I have. I should listen to what they have to say. They should learn from the person and take their advice, and in context of the subject being taught, should kind of acquiesce to their authority in that context and superior knowledge. You know, that's what good leaders do. I think I've heard some say they, in a company, they hire people who know more than they do and then get their advice about what to do, you know? There's more like a good boss. Instead of some little psychopath who doesn't know how to learn from other people or see the nature of someone out of that little organization So you're an administrator. So you're over someone in that little organization. So what? That's just a little tiny place amongst human organizations, amongst human culture, amongst human history, amongst reality. It's like nothing by comparison. But, psychopaths like power. So again, how do we fix that? How do we keep some people from abusing their power? And how do we make sure people are treated professionally and their professional competences identified and respected? Well, besides the discipline thing, we need critical thinking, logic, and root cause analysis chosen by organizations. We need methods of thought, and especially when dealing with personnel, we need procedures for judging. That administrators should be required to back up what they have to say. You want that position, then you sure the heck better be ready to defend your reasoning and back up what you have to say and have evidence and have reasoning and present it. There should be oversight on schools and, public and private, not just within the organization itself, because clearly that does not work. Just like in businesses, it'd be good if there was critical thinking, logic, root cause analysis, audits on these places. Of course, people are complex. We're not going to get rid of everything evil. It's not going to become some like Garden of Eden or some kind of magic place. There's always going to be some. The point is to try to control some of this stuff and make things better. If we can fix it, make it better, that's a win. As I say, it's impossible given how complex people are. The fact that we have free will and everything, it's impossible to get rid of it entirely. Plus, we're not omniscient. We don't catch everything. We've got to differentiate mistakes from, moral. There's something's done from a mistake of knowledge, and sometimes it's done from a breach of morality. We've got to be careful about differentiating the two. But if administrators, as part of the discipline they should have, if they had to present information to an advisory board and say, just to back up, this is a good teacher, this is not a good teacher. Some advisory board who's just not doesn't just yes man things or rubber stamp things, but someone who's actually objective. Neither too negative or too positive, but objective about what's going on. That would be good. And if schools really cared about treating people fairly, making sure they're sticking to the truth and they're honest, making sure they're training young people to be that way for the future, to not be manipulators, to not be dishonest, to not be liars, to not be immoral. If they really care about helping students be better, then they would choose to do this on their own. So they could have, for example, if an administrator is going to do something, with committees, okay, so there should be teachers groups, it should be built into schools. There should be at schools groups of teachers who provide some checks and balances to what administration does and has a little actual power, not some rubber stamp thing or something pretend. It shouldn't be like that one person I talked about who says, okay, teachers, what do you think? Well, we're going to do this, you know? It needs to be some serious check and balance thing. And again, should be reasoned out. There should be in some teacher training stuff, there's a lot of that. You know, okay, well then where's the root cause analysis teacher training days at school districts and schools? I'm not aware of any or much, you know. I'm not aware of any. There should be root cause analysis done for the teacher training day thingies and for administration. They should welcome it because it would make them better people. It would help them with good decisions, help each other stay better. I mean, who the hell doesn't want that? Unless someone's like a psychopath or a liar or dishonest or something, you know? Who doesn't want good people around them helping them be better and being honest about it and giving reasons and not jumping to conclusions? Or where are the real good teacher training days in critical thinking or logic? And where does it happen with administration? I'm not aware of any. If there are some, cool. I'd imagine there are some here and there. It's not without it. You know, if there were no critical thinking and logic in the culture, we'd be a lot worse off than we are. But those things need to be done. And so as part of it with the root cause analysis, critical thinking, logic. So if an administrator wants to say something about a teacher, they should have to back it up with evidence, as they say, and they should look for contrary stuff. And that would help prevent administrators from going after individual teachers or doing things because of their own personality instead of the effectiveness of teachers. As you all know, a lot of bosses will do beyond education, as people will talk about in some videos I'll post, how principals and administrators were out to get them. You know, we know that happens. Yeah, there are some people who are bad employees, bad teachers who should be dismissed or fired or helped out, but that's not always the case. We know, look at history, look at drama, look at what's presented in the arts that are good based on presenting kind of what happens in human nature and human history. You know, there are people who go after good people. So it should be, an administrator has to look at what some teachers say, not cherry pick them. Oh, I get along with these teachers and they hate this other teacher, so let me just talk to them and I'll have them say bad things about the teacher to back me up. No, it can't be some little mob rule thing. You got to look at what a variety of teachers say and students to see if it's correct, and then you don't just take their testimony out of nowhere. They got to reason things out so you know why they are saying, what their evidence is. Are they making stuff up about the teacher? Are they mistaken? Are they lying? Are they out to get them? Or are they misinterpreting? Or are they actually correct? Because of course, likewise, you need to get rid of bad or malicious teachers, just like bad or malicious administrators or anybody. But, the point here, of course, what we're talking about is how bad administrators affect good teachers and good students. That's, of course, the issue here. How to improve education. We all know how to get rid of some bad teachers. What we need to do better at is keeping good teachers and controlling bad administrators. There needs to be process, policy, process, practice, oversight. Some policies need to be written into place involving how to judge, how to present evidence, what needs to be done, what's required, on the part of an administrator, so they just don't do something on their own out of nowhere. And I know this happens. Like I've talked to parents too. Like some parents tell me, it's always the good teachers that disappear from private schools. Or some students will tell me how they had a teacher they liked and then the teacher left, and people don't know what happened or why. So, more evidence that it happens. But there should be policies and practices in the school about how to judge teachers and to make sure, as I say, it's not just the principal having bad judgment or being only about personalities involved. The decision should, there should be policy requirements, practice requirements that other teachers and some students have input. So there's checks and balances there. Then again, like say they've got each of them have to back up what they say, so it doesn't become like mob rule or something. And then, this would in the long run save time, and it helps educate. Then people are thinking, do I actually know the truth? What's my evidence? Does it really lead to this conclusion? Or is it not? That's part of what education's about. So it's not taking up time or being burdenous or whatever. It's like the whole point. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, education should enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Unquote. And then, if someone doesn't have time, it's like what? You don't have time to be honest? You don't have time to know what is true? You don't have time to know what's actually going on in the world? Well, then what are you doing in education? What are you doing? You need to, if you don't have time to be honest or to know what's true, then you sure the heck better get your act in gear and get that way. Get the time and mental discipline to know what's true. Get the time and mental discipline to be honest, to care about it. You don't care about other people or how it affects them, then what are you doing in education? Go work with rocks or something. If you are in education, you should care about who people actually are. And you should be working on helping them improve as humans, as thinkers. That's again as Martin Luther King Jr. said, education should make one a better thinker and should give one good character. And if someone ain't going to do that, then they should get out, as I say, or get help. Playing pretend or doing little Salem witch trials is not conducive to education or to a good culture. Because in education, it's got more profound consequences. So even more doesn't belong. Taking the time to do that, making it a habit. Eventually, it would be quicker. It would become, again, you do that over and over and over. You discipline yourself with critical thinking. You discipline yourself with logic. You discipline yourself with root cause analysis. You practice it and practice it and practice it. It becomes more habit. It doesn't take as long. You're ready to go. You can dish things out. Dish out the facts. You can marshal your evidence and marshal your argument. It'd be a problem only for a lot of people who don't think very well and are not logical and don't care about evidence. Then it's going to be a problem, but then they shouldn't be in education. They should be somewhere else. So, those things, I think, would help a lot if we do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Administrators should, because they establish the culture of a school and are in charge of that. As some people say in some videos I've listened to, they agree. It's not Like a teacher is only so much control in the classroom. If that isn't, certain standards aren't established outside of it, then it's not going to happen. Or if some students know that they can go lie to some administrator, and the administrator is so gullible and irrational that they just listen to whatever the student says, don't check for evidence, don't know about reasoning. But then, if they don't know about reasoning, that's what's going to happen. If they don't care about the truth or honesty, don't know much about the immaturity of children and how they'll lie sometimes to get their way, how they don't know consequences about what they're saying, about how they need to learn discipline, how they need to learn good habits. If an administrator doesn't do that, doesn't know that, which they should, and they shouldn't be in school education then, but if they're gullible, then there's going to be bad consequences. They're not going to understand a teacher. They're not going to know who they're talking to in another professional. To take, and you got that sometimes. I've heard of that. Unfortunately, some principals listening to students over teachers. I've heard that from a number of teachers I've talked to. Again, very bad consequences for the culture, very bad consequences for the school. And that's not going to help you keep the best and brightest teachers. Not at all. And it's not going to help you have good students. If something's like that is going on, administrators should do root cause analysis. Why is the student saying this? Oh, there's a number of students saying this. Yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire, but the fire ain't necessarily the teacher. It could be some bad students ganging up. The fire is probably a lack of study skills on the part of the students, or a lack of discipline, or a lack of knowing how to learn, because that's why they're there in the first place, to learn. Of course they don't know how to learn. If they knew, they wouldn't have to be at school. They'd be doing it all themselves. They have to be in a situation where they can be helped to learn logic, to learn good thinking skills, to learn the content they need as an adult, because they've got zero experience as an adult. They cannot see, oh, look, I've been an adult. I know what it's like to live 20 years as an adult. So here's what I need to know. So I'm going to go back to when I'm 5 and learn it. That doesn't happen, never will. It's people who are older and wiser who need to educate and train the young in things that'll help them, the young, when they get older. Because the young don't know better. That's part of growing up and everything. That's the nature of it. A lot of animals have to educate their young. And humans do conceptually. So, this stuff will help students be better too. When you do a good, as I say, root cause analysis, a student, to go back, a student goes in, complains, okay, why are they complaining? Oh! Instead of finger pointing, it's your fault, you teacher. No, do like the 5 whys analysis, or root cause analysis. It's kind of why some of this was started. Instead of blaming a particular person on an assembly line for some failure, what you need to see, what in the system, what in the organization was the cause of this issue, this problem on the assembly line, or this problem in a classroom. And the administrators need to take responsibility for it. They should be standing up in front of teachers and saying, I am at fault for this. I need to work on training better. I need to have all my students at the school take classes on study skills. I need to have some time during our classes where students learn good thinking skills and study skills, because that's what education's about. That will help them know what thinking is better, what learning is, and that'll help them do better in classes. That is the issue sometimes, not someone making a mistake on the assembly line or a teacher in a classroom. Root cause analysis would help so much. And it's known in some places that Johns Hopkins, I think it is, in the medical school or biomedical department, they did that. They did a root cause analysis. Our students, even though it's PhD, premier education, Johns Hopkins, one of the best medical colleges in the country, in the world, they identified that the students did not know logic, critical thinking, how to really do science. A lot of scientists are being turned out without knowing how to recognize bad science or good science, and so on. So they, doing that root cause analysis and identifying that, instituted a program. What I think they call it RISE. Used to be 3 R's, I think. Now they call it RISE. Maybe they've changed it since then. But they've specifically instituted a program to help teach the students how to think better. And if they need to do it, then so much more do high schools need to do it. I mean, you're supposedly talking about some of the best and brightest going to Johns Hopkins Biomedical College. So if they ain't got it, then most other people ain't got it. It's not like, a lot of other people know how to think and think well rationally and be logical and engage in critical thinking and engage in root cause analysis. But these people who are supposed to be the smartest don't, Or if people knew, there wouldn't be the 5 whys method or root cause analysis or stuff like that because people would already know it, but they don't. So, if that were done, it would help students out a lot. There wouldn't be finger pointing. People could actually get to the root of an issue in the system and fix it. And that would be great. At least I think so. Unfortunately, some administrators, some psychopaths, they'd rather point fingers and stuff like that. But there are some ways where it would help. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you agree with critical thinking, logic, root cause analysis, made policy and imposed upon administration with outside auditors, with oversight boards, with checks and balances. Education would be so much better. Then, as I say, we could improve education. Like I say, improving administration is one way to do that. It's like improving management. And this would help in management too. Some of the same stuff there, But if you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully that helps, and hopefully we can get some of that done in the world. Of course, it starts at home. We've got to start doing this on our own, be disciplined and stick to it with wisdom. It starts at home first. Discipline ourselves, because we can't help others do it until we know how to do it. So, thank you for listening. Have a good day. Be logical, be reasonable, be wise.